I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Future Template Parent Podcast. Welcome to episode 157. Today, I want to talk about something that can feel a little bit scary when it comes to offering therapy intensives. You know, we love intensives, the deep transformative work, not the weekly stop and start, the container that allows us to not carry ongoing clients if that's not what we want, but they are intense. It's in the name. And if we're being completely honest, I think a lot of us wonder what happens if there's a crisis in this intensive. What if a client develops acute suicidal ideation with a plan, intent, self-harming behaviors, between the intake and the intensive? What if they don't disclose it during the screening? Or what if it kicks up right in the middle of the multi-day intensive? If you've ever worried about this, you're not alone. Today, I'm talking a little bit about how to navigate, plan for, and manage a crisis during an intensive. We're going to look first at screening and prevention, then in the moment crisis management, and then practical logistics like your clinical boundaries and financial boundaries. So we got this. You can do this. Let's start at the very beginning. Intake and screening. Prevention is the best tool, but of course you need to be very intentional. When you're conducting an initial consultation or intake, you're not just looking for clinical fit, you're looking for stability. You're assessing for stability. You want a clear picture of their history of suicidality, self-harm, dissociation, significant substance use, whatever your boundaries are. And so know your own boundaries. Every clinician listening to this has a different level of comfort and training. Make the decisions that are safe and responsible for you, not just thinking about the client. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to give the client a safe experience. If a presentation feels totally out of your wheelhouse, especially in this compressed format, it's okay to say no. And one of my absolute non-negotiables for high risk or highly dissociative clients, if I do decide that I want to work with them in an intensive container, is ensuring they have a support team in place. If someone presents with significant risk factors, they must have a primary therapist, or at least a psychiatrist that they work with closely, an established mental health professional they've been seeing for the long term and are continuing to see. I will not be the only therapist for a client like that. I must collaborate with other providers before, during, after the intensive. You cannot be that solo clinical island for a high-risk client in a short-term container. If someone finds you, they've never been in therapy before, that's a big for me. They have a history of crisis, step back, be cautious. They may need a different or a higher level of care before they're ready for an intensive, right? So that's so important. Safety planning starts in your paperwork. Ensure that your informed consent clearly outlines the limits of confidentiality regarding safety, even in a short-term capacity. You want to make sure they know that you will have a crisis response if the situation warrants it. And then also tell them really frankly during the intensive, I always say this, right? Between day 1 and day 2, you might actually feel worse before you feel better. We're kicking up a lot of material that maybe you haven't accessed. By naming this early, you might take away some of the panic if they experience an uptick in distress. And also you might want to ask them, if you are concerned about their capacity, what might that look for you if you feel worse? How would you know if you need to ask for help or if this is something you can get through? Okay, so what happens if you do everything right and then no red flags popped up, but the work does trigger a crisis? Okay, first let's look between days, like if it happens between days, and then we'll talk about what happens if it happens in your session. So many of us have clients who travel from out of state for intensives. When that is the case, I give my intensive clients my number and they know that they can text me between days for urgent matters or emergencies. I certainly have a time limit during which I will not be available. With an intensive, I do this differently as well. Like if it's a multi-day intensive, I probably will be accessible by text through 9 p.m. After that, I'm going to tell them, this is the number you need to call if you're experiencing a crisis, right? So if a client reaches out at 8:55 p.m. between day 1 and 2 and says they're self-harming or considering self-harming or having active suicidal thoughts, and the other thing too is I'm going to tell them when they should reach out to me, like what would warrant, needing to reach out, right? Not that I wouldn't respond, but I want them to be aware of like, okay, don't keep this to yourself, right? If these things are happening, please do reach out to me. But, I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to say, okay, where are you staying? If they're out of town, I want to give them the appropriate crisis response numbers. I'll say, do you need me to get on the phone with you right now to talk through this? I'm going to get their emergency contact and contact that person. Of course, I will remind the client both during the intake process and during this, like, you have an emergency contact for this reason. I do need to break strict confidentiality and reach out to this person. And of course that they will have signed a form that says that that's what I would do. And then I'll say to them, okay, your husband's listed or whoever as your emergency contact. I need to call him to ensure you're safe tonight. Shall we put him on speaker together so we can talk through it? So we'll do like a 3-way call, something like that. I want to also make sure that I'll say, can you please like alert him that I'll be calling so that he knows to pick up or whatever. Okay, so and if the client is going to emergency services, I am going to ask them to contact me to let me know like what, I arrived at the hospital or whatever, just so I have some sense of like, they didn't just stay in their hotel room, even though they told me they were going to do something. If I'm in touch with the emergency contact, I'll make sure that they, the client reaches out to them as well. So that's what I would do if it happens between days. If it happens in the office. So first of all, I've actually never had to hospitalize someone during an intensive, either between days or when they're in my office. I've certainly had clients bring up suicidal ideation as a result of the work, but we talk through it, we anchor, we safety plan. But I am very aware that it could happen. So what would you do? If it happens in your office, you're going to treat it like you would in regular practice. If you really feel like a client is in imminent danger, it's your job to keep them safe. And please, if you possibly can, and hopefully you can, stay with that person until medical professionals or crisis workers arrive at your office. And be completely transparent. Have a really frank, honest conversation with them about what's happening, why you're doing it, what the goals are. Of course, I always want someone to voluntarily hospitalize, not involuntary. And again, I haven't had to involuntarily hospitalize someone. It's been a very long time since I was in community mental health, actually. So it's been many years, but I do know it's possible. I also will say that I am someone who errs on the side of hospitalization as a last resort. So I am going to do everything within my power to keep that from happening. But of course, if it's necessary, I'm going to do it, especially if someone does not have an emergency contact within physical close distance. Ideally, if I'm doing an intensive with someone who I think is high risk, not ideally, I definitely will have spoken with that client before about what's your safety plan for while you're here? Are you going to come with somebody else? Is it safe for you to be here all on your own? So I think it's important to have those conversations too. And, trust your instincts, please. You are an experienced clinician. Just because you're doing an intensive, that doesn't change the crisis intervention skills you already have. Stay grounded, stay calm. You can do this. And communicate with your client as much as possible. And of course, I would also say, if you're going to have releases for other mental health providers who know the client, be in touch with them as well. Please make sure that you're leaving messages, reaching out to the therapist, to the psychiatrist, letting them know what's going on, getting their assessment. They might also want to contact their client. Be involving as many people as you can in the support structure. Okay, so a little about pragmatics. And what I mean by this is money and policies. What if a client goes to the hospital after day 1? Or a crisis hits and you don't complete the intensive? What are you going to do about the payment? It's so vital to have a clear written policy before this ever happens, and like all policies, to discuss it with your client when they're signing the paperwork, so they know what they are agreeing to. I think, again, this has never happened to me, but this is the policy I have. And this is a very rare set of circumstances. So I think that you could be more flexible in terms of deposit pay structure than you might be with someone who does not have that same level of, instability, right? So here's what I would do. I would keep the deposit, okay? And if they've done any portion of the intensive, I'm going to keep that payment too. Say they did day one, right? I'm not going to charge for the rest. I will allow them to reschedule the remaining time within a realistic window once they're stabilized. And if they travel a long way, I think I would offer the remaining sessions virtually if it's possible in terms of, state lines and all that stuff. I'm not going to just keep someone's money and say, oh, sorry, we didn't finish, too bad. But I think it's important to think through how you're honoring both your time and your energy while also acknowledging that crisis situations can create a different dynamic. Having a written policy safeguards your time and gives the client, clear expectations during a moment that can be scary. Sorry, just had to answer a text from daycare. Right, so the policy will protect you. It's going to protect your client. Okay, and once the immediate crisis is managed, the work isn't done, right? Like I said, you need to be looping in their care team immediately. You need to be making sure you've communicated with emergency contacts as appropriate. This is one of the many reasons why we get releases for providers. I think if you can talk to them when the crisis is happening, that would be ideal. And then also follow up and connect later. For many reasons, good quality of care, so the client can share, so you can share some of your observations with them. And so the client is getting, good clinical care throughout. And remember, take care of you. Intensives take a lot of energy. Managing a crisis inside an intensive is a lot. I think a lot of imposter syndrome could come up, like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? What was I thinking? Please take care of yourself. Sit back, take some time, get some clinical consultation. Don't beat yourself up because you didn't predict the crisis. We can't perfectly anticipate how everyone is going to respond. And in your paperwork, you're going to also have that language about, no guarantees for outcomes. That protects you. I would talk to your lawyer about this if this is something you are concerned about. Talk to your malpractice insurance. Most malpractice insurances will give you a free consult with their lawyer, and make sure your paperwork is all up to snuff in that regard. But do not beat yourself up. And this does not mean that you are not a competent intensive therapist. It does not mean that. It's something that a lot of us, if we stay in this field long enough, really awful stuff happens. Clients might die. Clients might take their own lives, and I'm not at all trying to be flippant. It's the nature of the work that we do. And intensives bring that into a different realm. But some of the things I've talked about today can help you protect yourself, not against this ever happening, but against feeling unprepared. So screen thoroughly, build a clinical team around those clients, prepare them for what it's going to be like, have paperwork and your policies and your financial stuff in line, and have your clients be aware of it so that you feel confident, and trust your clinical gut. Like, how to do this. And if something doesn't feel right in the intake or in the consult call, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not sure this is really the right fit. Let's think about what's the next best step for you, right? So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you found this helpful. Until next time, take good care of yourself, keep doing this vital work, and have a great week, everyone. Take good care.